Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Lance. I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict, and my name is Yisreal Campbell. I have been honored to speak at several CA meetings over the years. I just feel it's always important to let you know that I snorted the majority of my, I got sober at 16 years old, so I snorted the majority of my cocaine off the back of my high school ID. So I am hardly I'm not a Tony Montana type. But that's a Scarface reference. Is that, Andrew, is that way too old for these kids? Anyway, I know you're not kids. You're really, really, really mature young people. Um, okay, so um, I only have the one story, as my sponsor used to say. So I will tell you the story. My experiences of recovery is essentially from Alcoholics Anonymous. When I first got sober, the first couple of years I was sober, there was a young woman in NA who was in and out of NA, and whenever she was sober, I would go to NA, and whenever she was out, I would go to back to AA. Though, as the book says, I was convinced there was no human power that could have relieved my alcoholism or addiction. I felt there was a human power that could have relieved her addiction, and that I was it. That has proven to be wrong. We're still friends, some 40, almost 45 years later, but she's still using. I love her dearly. But anyway, let me just go back to the beginning. I was born and raised in Philadelphia, in the Philadelphia area. I I like to say that I don't know if fear, anxiety, self-obsession, self-centeredness can be passed through breast milk, but if it can, it was in my case. I was just I was consumed by selfishness and self-centeredness. That we think is the root of our troubles, and that's was true for me. I was just filled with self. I couldn't have been more consumed by self. And I took a drink when I was 9 years old, and it was magic. It was a spiritual experience. It was exactly as Dr. Carl Jung described in his letter to Bill Wilson about Roland Hazard's experience. He says his craving for alcohol was the equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God. I wouldn't have called it a spiritual experience then. I didn't know it was a spiritual experience. I just had never felt so changed so quickly. Nothing else in my life had ever had that kind of effect. Literally, I just, bam, felt entirely differently. I have two memories of that night. I was drinking Carling Black Label beer. The first memory is walking up to a grown man who was walking his dog, putting my arm around his shoulder, looking him in the eye and saying, "Get bent." Now, I don't know what that means tonight. It's nighttime here. I'm in Jerusalem, Israel, and it's 10 o'clock at night here. Um, I don't know what get bent means tonight, but it was the ability, it was the freedom that alcohol offered me to look a man. Now I sit before you, I'd say 5'9". I have a dear friend who swears she's 5'9", and she's a lot taller than I am, so maybe I'm 5'7" in the real world. Um, but I can tell you this, when I was 9, I was a lot shorter. So I don't know if I looked a grown man dead in the eye and said, "Get bent," but that's what it felt like. I had never felt such freedom in my entire life. Later that night, so as to not get caught, well, I should tell you what happened first before I tell you what we were not getting caught doing. I threw up in my sleeping bag, and so as to not get caught, my cousin wouldn't let me let his mother clean my sleeping bag. So I slept in my puke for a week. I mean, we squeegeed it out as best we could the first night, and by the second
Mm.
night it was just damp, and by the third night it was flaking off, and by the end of the week I barely remember vomiting there. And if you had come up to me a week or so later and said, "What did alcohol do for you?" I would have said, "Alcohol allowed me to walk up to a grown man," and I would have told you that story. And if you had said, "Did alcohol do anything else for you?" I would have thought about it for a moment and said, "Nope, that was it." I was already minimizing the negatives and accentuating the positives, and that was my experience of drugs and alcohol. I drank as often as I could. I realized that for me, alcohol was a solution. I didn't know what the problem was. It was an answer. I didn't know what the question was. And that was my experience of alcohol. Alcohol was incredibly powerful for me. So powerful that on Friday afternoons we would steal my friend Brink's mother's car and we would drive into West Philadelphia, which was, you know, not really the place for four white guys in a Mercury Bobcat that looked like it was owned by a woman who spent most of her time at a country club, which it was. And we would buy a case of beer. And as soon as that case of beer was in the trunk, I felt better. And for the whole rest of the afternoon, knowing that there was actually three of us in the car because there were three of us on that case of Colt 45 malt liquor, which meant that each of us would get eight beers. And we didn't drink them in the afternoon. We just bought them in the afternoon. But even the act of buying alcohol made me feel better. The whole rest of the day, I acted better. I acted more kindly, more compassionately, more patiently. Any characteristic that I know, I was better at as a result of knowing I had access to alcohol. And I only used for 7 years, as I told you. I got sober at 16 years old. So there's a lot of things I didn't do in terms of drugs and alcohol, but I used every chemical I ever met to the best of my ability. I just, excuse me. I didn't want to be me. I didn't want to feel like me. I didn't want to experience life like I experienced life. I didn't want the world to react to me the way the world reacted to me. And alcohol and drugs changed that. And I did as many as I could for as long as I could. And that turned out to be 7 years through a series of events. And that series of events, to tell you as quickly as possible, was that a friend of mine got sober. And at first, she hid it from us. She spent a year in a drug program, and we were told she was living with her sister. She came out of that program and she relapsed almost immediately. And then she had a bad, I don't know, couple of weeks, culminating in a really bad night. And I was witness to most of that. And she said, she got sober. She told us she was getting sober. She told us she was going to meetings. She told us she was not going to use or drink, and she didn't. And that was November of 1979. And I saw that happen. And over the next couple of few months, I saw a change in her, many changes in her. Uh, and so in early February of 1980, was driving to a high school hockey game. Our hockey team was undefeated for the entire 4 years I was in high school. I mean, it was fun to go to the games because you knew we were going to win. It was never even close, right? So we just had fun going to the games and cheering for the winning team. And one night I was on my way to the game and I stopped to get high and I had a couple Quaaludes and I had just a little bit of everything that I could get my hands on. We were smoking 6-foot bongs. You had to stand on a chair to get to the bong. I did. And that's the way life was. I got to the game. Well, I didn't get to the game. I had an run accident with the Catholic priest on my way to the game. Uh, I made a brave and daring getaway. It was, I don't know if any of you have ever heard the AA speaker named Norm Alpe. He died a long time ago, but Norm used to say that this is a disease of inches and seconds. And the car I was driving, I can really describe my entire childhood and my parents to you by telling you about the car I was driving. I was driving it 1971. It was 1979. It was 1980, but I was driving a 1971 orange Plymouth Duster that my parents had bought in 1972 because it was no longer the model year, so there was a little benefit to buying it off off the model year. Uh, it had no power steering. It had no radio. The power steering would have been $200, and radio would have been another, let's say, $150. $350 savings, and why not? You're only going to keep the car for 16 years, you know? What would the cost of power steering and a radio been amortized over 16 years, right? Like 25 cents a month, like less, right? Unbelievable. But that was my parents, that was my childhood, that was me. So I'm driving this orange Plymouth Duster, and I've got like a radio on the seat next to me, and I'm high on Quaaludes and 6-foot bongs and a couple of beers, one of which is between my legs, and I'm looking down at the radio, right? So my head is pointed at the steering wheel, essentially. When I hit this car, and my front right driver's side quarter panel hits his driver's side rear quarter panel, which means we were seconds and inches away from a head-on collision while my head was pointed at the steering wheel, which, I mean, either I'd be in a wheelchair or I'd be dead, and you'd have another speaker. But that's not what happened. I glanced off of his car. I kept going. I made several turns, and then I parked and got rid of the beer between my legs, and I'm standing there staring at the car when a man pulls up. He gets out of his car. He says, "Have you been in an accident?" And I said, I wanted to say, "Are you a fucking moron?" But I didn't. I just said yes. Because like the car, it looks like the grill's been ripped out from the center, the headlight's gone, the quarter panel's back at the door, and he says, he tells me he's a Catholic priest. Now, at the time, I sit before you an Orthodox Jew living in Jerusalem. But at the time when I came to AA, the day before I came to AA, I was an Irish Italian Catholic kid from Philadelphia. So having a hit and run accident with a Catholic priest was the same as, you know, punching a guy in the face and then being told he's a made man, right? Being told he's not God, but he works for God. I burst into tears. He asked me, then he asked me for the license and registration, insurance and registration. I hand him the entire contents of the glove compartment. So that's like maps to places we've never been. This is my mom's car. Games to play on trips we never took. Tissues, mom tissue, lots of mom tissue. You know, that balled up tissue. Don't know if it's been used or if it's just been in her purse forever. She had a book of sonnets. She used to read sonnets at the Shakespearean sonnets at the red lights, you know. I just knew I'd never find the registration and insurance. So I handed him the entire contents of the glove compartment. He asked me if I'd been drinking. I said, "No, Father, I wasn't thinking." He said, "Look, I just want you to walk home." I'm sure he thought I'd been drinking. Turns out I had been drinking. I would have walked home too if he hadn't left before I left. As soon as he left, suddenly the idea of walking home didn't seem so important anymore. So I got back in the car, and as I ran over a sign that said no parking anytime, I thought it's a good thing they don't let people park here because that could be dangerous, you know? And I get to where I was going, and believe me, this was before friends don't let friends drive drunk. This was back in the days of friends go out driving drunk with friends. I mean, we used to go out drinking and then go get the car later, right? Because it was the drinking that made us the good driver, you know, and then we'd drive around, race around all night long. And the weird thing was I arrived where I was going and my friend saw the car. The game had already ended. That's kind of the scheduling I was doing, the timing wise of my scheduling. And they looked at the car and they wouldn't let me drive home. And I was incensed. I couldn't believe it. But they were dead serious. They wouldn't let me drive home, and they didn't. And I went home. My parents were separated at the time. My mother said, "What happened?" I said, "I ran into a white car." She said, call your father. He asked me what happened. I said, I ran into a white car. And that's all I know. The next day I spoke to the priest. He said, tell them you stayed at the scene of the accident. I did. Tell him that. What happened was I got up the next day and I got on the school bus and I felt like I was going to puke. We smoked pot every day on the way to school because it made us smarter. And and we were riding on a public bus. Like it was a school bus, but it was just for school kids, but it was a public bus. So it was like a row against the back and then two seats forward and then two side seats. It's almost like there was a circle almost naturally made for us to pass the pot around. You know, it was like they wanted us to smoke pot on the way to school. And so, but I didn't smoke that day because I'd once seen Joe Doherty throw up in his hands on a public bus and on that very same bus. And when you throw up in a public space, I don't know if any of you, probably most of you have already done this, but for some of our more frou-frou-y people, I'm not going to name names, Gina, Stacy, Raven. I don't know if you're frou-frou or not. I can't see you, but your pictures look pretty frou-frou. So if you've never thrown up in a public space, you naturally put your hands up because you're in a public space. So, and when you do, you deflect the vomit back onto you, right? And this is what happened with Joe Doherty anyway. He threw up, it reflected back onto him and then ran down his chest. So I wanted to avoid that at all costs. So I didn't smoke pot on the way to school. But by the time I got to school, I needed something. And uh, I saw my friend Jimmy McNally, and I said to him, Jimmy, what happened is I had a teacher that thought I was a drug addict, which was a really stretchy kind of thing for him to think that. Um, anyway, long story short, because I'm running out of time already. I promise just to use my time and then some of the Q&A time, but I won't use any more of the group's time. No. Okay, so I wanted to show him my homework because he was under the impression that I was a drug addict, and I was trying to avoid having to avoid him call my parents. And so, but I threw up in the hallway, which is not allowed in a Catholic boys' school. So I decided I was going to go home. And I saw Jimmy and I was like, Jimmy, anything you got. I just need something. I had resolutely decided not to get high about an hour before, and now I was already throwing that away. And Jimmy said, I only have a little and I need it for myself. Can you close my door, Tibia? Yona, close my door, please. And so he said, I've only got a little and I need it for myself. And I went home, I slept for a few hours, and then I called AA. But I just want to stick to Jimmy for a minute. For years, as soon as I learned about lower companions, I thought Jimmy's a lower companion, right? I needed that morning. He didn't give it to me. That's like by definition, in my mind, a lower companion. So the reason I bring him up and the reason I talk about him is because at our 10-year reunion, he came up to me. He came up to me and he said, are you still sober? And I was like, what? And he's like, are you still sober? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, remember that morning when you asked me if for something and I didn't give it to you? And I was like, yeah. He's like, maybe you wouldn't even be sober if I had given you something that morning. And I was like, oh my God, I've spent 10 years thinking this guy was like a lower companion, and he spent 10 years, 11 and a half, because I was a year and a half sober by the time we graduated. He's been spent the last 11 and a half years thinking he saved my life. So it's just really for me an example of I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm thinking about, and anything I think is probably wrong. And I should run it through. Not unlike, I'll tell you this, I didn't read the 24-hour book, 24-hour day book when I got sober because it was a little preachy and a little Christian, it seemed to me. But I used to read this book called the 24-hour day book, and I don't no, the day by day book. And I don't know if they still even have it. It was put together said that it was put together by the Denver Young People's Group. And it was less Christian-y and less preachy and less religion-y, which I was super allergic to when I got sober. I mean, that I'm a practicing Orthodox Jew is ridiculous. My life is filled with yeses and nos and have tos and can't nots and like hundreds. 10 Commandments is total shit. It's to get you in the door, man. There's 613 commandments in Judaism. Several lists have been written, none of which match, but somehow they all magically come up to 613. But that's neither here nor there. What's important is that I that I'm religious is ridiculous. Um, so, um, oh, I finally got, the day by day books, right? So I used to read that every day. And one day it said, be vulnerable today. So I decided, and just to remind you, I'm telling you this because like I should never do anything of my own accord without checking with someone else, certainly not when I was new. It said, be vulnerable today. So I thought, okay, what I'll do is I'll go sit at Steve Mahan's house. Steve was the local dealer, and I'll watch Steve sell drugs all day. And I'll be vulnerable. So I call my sponsor and I'm like, okay, guess what? I'm going to sit at Steve Mahan's house all day and be vulnerable. He's like, what? I'm like, yeah, the day by day book says to be vulnerable today. He's like, that's not what it means, dummy. He didn't say dummy. I have had sponsors that say dummy. Um, if you're lucky. I seem to alternate between loving sponsors and poke you in the chest sponsors, and I go back and forth. Currently on a loving sponsor. Um, but he said, no, what that means is tell your mom you love her. That's the vulnerability they're speaking about. And I was like, what? I was like, no way, I can't do that. I mean, I thought I could have stayed at Steve Mahan's house all day and not gotten high, but there was no way I was going to tell my mother I loved her. So, um, anyway, so back to that day one. I go home after the throwing up in the hallway. I'm still a Catholic, so it's more trouble with God. I sleep for a few hours. I wake up. I pull out the yellow pages. If you don't know what the yellow pages are, ask Lovey. Um, she doesn't look old enough to know what the yellow pages are, but she does. And I looked up Alcoholics Anonymous and I called the number, and a woman answered. She said, Alcoholics Anonymous, may we help you? And I said, how do you get into AA? And she said, the door. And I thought, we don't need that kind of attitude from our service workers. You know what I mean? But that's a little much. So she said, if you get here by 12:30, I'll take you to a board meeting. Is what I thought she said. Probably not what she said, but that's what I heard. And I wasn't going, I'm thinking, I'm not even a member yet. Well, why would I go to a board meeting? So what happened is I got there around 2:30. When I got to AA consisted of, it was a second-story clubhouse above a bar. It had a big window in the front of the room where people would sit and watch life go by. It was paneled. It was decorated. I've never found the pamphlet how to decorate an AA club, but I think there is one because they all seem to be decorated the same way. It was wood paneling, which had about 50 years of tar and nicotine dripping down the walls, so it felt like a cave that was melting. There was the AA slogans on artistic angles up and down. I just have to let the dog in. Dog is definitely alcoholic. He doesn't know if he needs a meeting or not. Um, and what he does need is to be on the other side of the closed door, whether he's in or out. Once you close the door, he wants to be on the other side. So if that's not alcoholic behavior, I don't know what is. Um, so it's decorated with the AA slogans, right? Easy does it. They're framed as if, and they're written in that Gothic lettering as if they're like really, really important things. Like Easy does it. Like, oh, who thought of that? Wow. Think, think, think. That one's usually upside down or crooked because of our thinking. First things first, another doozy. Wow, that's deep. And then the steps and traditions. Now, those banners that we have, and I swear this is true, used to be window shades. You used to be able to snap them at the bottom and it would roll up. I think we got cheap and we stopped putting them on window shades. Now they just have, they're still vinyl, but they used to be actual window shades. And I think that speaks volumes about the anonymous programs, because if you're willing to put your best documents, your best, like imagine a courthouse that had the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution on a window shade, right? Or a church that had the Ten Commandments on a window shade, right? Nobody's going to do that. And then we put spotlights on them in case you didn't notice they were window shades, right? And then in green Gothic backlit lettering in the room, it said, "But for the grace of God." And I looked around the room. There's like 350. I don't know if anyone remembers those Dannon yogurt commercials, mid 1970s. These guys, these 150-year-old Russian guys, they could barely move. Then they ate Dannon yogurt and they were like dancing. And those three guys were in AA when I got here. And they were the only three people in AA when I got here. And I looked at them and I thought, if I don't drink for as long as they've been alive, I can't have a drink for 134 years. And that was not a comfort. I wasn't like, yeah. I was like, shit. Right. And I sat in that clubhouse all day and a bunch of people came in. And I want to say they were kind, they were generous, they sat with me. They said to me, uh, they basically all said the same thing. They said, I used to drink. I don't drink anymore. My life used to be shit. Now it's really great. Here's my number. Call anytime. They shook my hand. They gave me their number. Sometimes they even wrote call anytime, exclamation point, underlined. And I always say I do that too. I give newcomers my number because I know I do it for two reasons, really. One, it was done for me. And two, they're never going to call. They're just not going to call. You can give your fucking phone number out to newcomers all. Marsh, stop. I'm in a meeting. I'm in a meeting. Shut up. You can give your number out to every fucking newcomer you meet. They are never going to call. I used to speak a lot at conferences when I lived $250 away from any major city. I thought I was a great speaker too, and I might be a $250 speaker, but I'm not a $1,200 speaker. I'm a Zoom at 4 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, sure. We don't mind if you speak for us at 4 o'clock in the morning. But anyway, I jest. Lance, I'm not jesting. I'm really just expressing my resentment in a way that most people won't ask me to write about it. People used to hear me speak at conferences and they'd come up to me afterwards and say, I'm going to take your number and I'm going to call you at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'd give them my number because they're not going to fucking call either. We are genetically predisposed to not calling each other. Okay? So one guy took my number. I left there with a pile of phone numbers. I stayed for my first AA meeting. I got a ride home from Lizanne's older brother, George. Right? Irish Catholic family, 9 kids. I think 7 are in AA today. Interestingly enough, Lizanne is not. She stayed sober for about another 3 or 4 months, and she's been drinking for the last 44 years. Crazy. Anyway, George gave me a ride home. I'm sitting at home the next afternoon. The one guy that took my phone number calls me. I was shocked. He's like, hey, Chris. I was like, yeah. He's like, this is Paul from AA. I was like, hey, Paul, how are you? He's like, I'm great. How'd you like to go to a meeting tonight? What I wanted to say was, a meeting tonight? I went to AA yesterday. You know what I mean? Like 2 days in a row seemed a little drastic. Like I need help, but not that much help. Maybe like, how about how about next month? You got any openings next month? But I said yes because that's what I say if people ask. Of course, none of the other people could have asked because none of the other people had my phone number. They were waiting for me to call them. Which again, I just want to stress, I would rather be beaten with a baseball bat than call a complete stranger and say, what? I'm scared. I don't feel good. What am I going to say? Right? But he called me. So I agreed to go to the meeting. Now, Paul didn't have a car. So Paul had to call another guy to get a ride for both of us, which he did. And it was there that I ended up at the Paoli Young People's Group beginners meeting. And I sat in a room with a bunch of people, and all I remember is not saying that I was an alcoholic when everyone went around the room and said they were alcoholic, with the exception of Paul. He must have noticed that I was, I don't know, shaking, sweating, whatever. I don't know what. He was the only person that hadn't introduced himself when they got to me, in my memory. This could be all completely fabricated. And he said, my name is Paul. And I said, my name is Chris. And then an hour later, I'm running around the room going, I'm alcoholic. If what's wrong with you is what's wrong with me, and you're alcoholic, then I'm alcoholic. And I want to say a few things there. First of all, if you come through the mental illnesses in my family and you only have alcoholism, you're doing very well. I come from a long line of crazy people. In my family, being an alcoholic is like going to Harvard. I mean, I've got straight up crazy relatives on both sides. Well, my father's side is just silent. They're just quiet, good, quiet people. They're the kind of people you need around to plan a funeral. I'm telling you, my father could be told that his entire family is gunned down in cold blood, and he'd be like, well, we should call the Stretch Funeral Home. I think he was all about the details. Anyway, my mother was nuts, as were all of her brothers and sisters. Crazy, crazy. Anyway, so there I am and I want to say what happened that day. My dear friend Scott Redman of blessed memory used to say that alcoholism is contagious. We catch it through our ears. You'll excuse me for just saying alcoholism. It's 10:30 at night. I'm tired. I would pretend to be a cocaine addict with more energy if it were 4 in the afternoon. But it's I don't believe anyone that says they're an alcoholic and not a drug addict. I know my dear friend is here. It's fucking bullshit, okay? It's all the same fucking thing. No, you know what the test is? If you're not a drug addict, why don't you do drugs? Right? You don't do drugs because you can't safely do drugs. That's why you don't do drugs. Right? If you could, you would. And if you did, you'd be fucked. That's my feeling. Just my feeling. Just one man's opinion. Nothing more than that. You asked me to speak, so you're stuck with me. Right, Chris? Anyway, so call yourself what you will. But if you're an alcoholic, or if you're a cocaine addict, or if you're a tweaker, or if you're a junkie, if you're a fucking, I don't know what, tweaker, did I say that already? Whatever you are, don't do anything else either. Okay? If you're a fucking, dyed in the wool, fucking, I don't know, you snorted so much, you inhaled your nose one day, don't drink sherry. Don't have a wine cooler, okay? Because you're fucked if you do. To use religious, theological, medical language, you will be fucked. You'll be pissing the bed if you're lucky. Shitting yourself in public if you're not, okay? That's what happens to us. I hate to be so spiritual, but what can I do? I'm a religious guy. Okay. So Paul calls me. Paul takes me to a meeting. I catch alcoholism at that meeting, not just at that meeting, but at many, many, many other meetings along the way, like perhaps this meeting. Perhaps when I was walking through the courtyard of our buildings with my son trying to get him food for the trip that he's taking at, his 4-day hiking trip that leaves at 5:45 in the morning. And I'm thinking to myself, why the fuck didn't we do this? Well, I'm really thinking, why didn't you do this with your mother any day? And secondly, why didn't we do this on Friday rather than at 9:40 on Saturday night when you're leaving at 5:45 in the morning and I'm speaking in 20 minutes, right? Maybe I don't remember I have alcoholism then. Maybe I don't remember that I suffer from a spiritual disease. Maybe I don't remember that I need to be of service to others, even though I'm supposed to be in the act of service right then and there. What am I getting at? I learned that and I reminded of that and I relearned that and I am again reminded of that in a meeting. Which is, I know these are tired old rants that you've all heard me give, those of you that have heard me before. But right? What am I getting at? Meeting makers make it. No, they don't. Yes, the fucking they do. And you're a fucking meeting maker yourself. The person saying meeting makers don't make it. Of course they make it. Okay, maybe they don't make it because of, or just because they go to a meeting, but there's no such thing as just going to a meeting. You're in the meeting and you remember, oh, right, I'm part of a spiritual program of action. Oh, right, I have to maintain my spiritual condition. Oh, right, I have to take the newcomer's phone number. Oh, right, I have to take the speaker's phone number and call him at 2 o'clock in the morning. Oh, right, I have a commitment here. Shit, I forgot. I have to clean up. I have to set up. I have to make coffee. I have to participate in the service of the structure. All of which I'm reminded of in the meeting. When I'm sitting at home in my underwear, watching Netflix, documentaries, of course, with fully dressed people in them, I forget that stuff, right? I don't remember that all the time. But when I'm at a meeting or when I'm answering my phone, when someone calls me, or when I'm calling someone, all that stuff, that comes out. Okay. So that's what happens. Paul starts taking me to meetings, and I ask him quickly soon thereafter, I get, okay, I get it. We're an Alcoholics Anonymous. We don't drink, but what do we do? Because the thought of going through life without any chemical assist was just beyond. What do you mean? What do you mean? You know what he said to me? I'm addicted to escape. I thought, well, I wouldn't call it addicted. I would just like to escape a lot, like all the time. Like never not be escaping. Is that really addiction? Such a negative term for such a fun thing. I wish I'd listened to him because I could have saved a lot of money, time, and effort in a lot of other areas of my life. But he said, we don't take anything that affects us from the neck up. And he didn't say the next part, but it's true, with the exception of caffeine, nicotine, and sugar. I don't know why caffeine, nicotine, and sugar were exempted from the not anything that affects us from the neck up category, but they were, and we're not discussing it now. So there I was, a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I started to work the steps ever so slowly. I went to a lot of meetings. I got involved with a lot of people. I made a lot of changes in my life. Like I'm pretty sure I'm one of the few people that ever considered the spiritual plane of their junior prom date. Like, not many people in the 11th grade are considering whether they're on the same spiritual plane as their date, but I was. I wasn't on the same plane with her. She was far advanced beyond me, but I considered it when asking her. And which in and of itself was different than when I had asked Joyce McAndrews, Lizanne's younger sister. Susan McAndrews was another one of the McAndrews girls that I was in love with. When I asked Joyce 21 times on a drunken night to go to my ring dance with me, 20 times she said yes. And then one time she said no, and it never changed from that. Even when I fell in the bushes outside her house, running away from her mother, who was screaming, "Who is that? Is that Chris Campbell? Um, let's get him some coffee," as I fell into the bushes. Anyway, um, so I, I, I started getting, um, I just started doing what we do, going to a lot of meetings, getting commitments at meetings, calling Paul every night, um, and to the best of my ability, I started to work the steps. But I was thinking about this the other day. Sometimes you hear these speakers in meetings, and they're like, when I came to the program, I couldn't even speak. Now I've created my own language. And you're like, what? You know what I mean? They're like, I couldn't read the big book for 7 months, not 2 words. And now I have 6 doctorates, 4 in linguistics. It's like, what the fuck? How did that happen? Right? Like, I'm lucky to have a job, I just want to stress how slow going it was, like, um, and it seemed spectacularly fast. Like, I met Paul and I started calling Paul, and I remember just hanging up the phone in tears, thinking, God, I got the most brilliant sponsor ever. I mean, I could see there were some duds around here, and thank God I got a really, really, really. And I'd call him every day, and at the end of every call, he'd say, "Don't drink and go to meetings." And I'd say, God, man, the guy's fucking brilliant. I don't know where he comes up with this stuff. And then one night he said, "Don't drink, go to meetings and pray." And I stopped calling. I stopped calling because that's not going to work for me. Like I mean, I just, so he said I'd been raised Catholic, and my mother had been in the convent, and when she left the convent, she left God, but she didn't leave the church. She left God, but not the church, which meant that every interaction we had with the church was just filled with anger and resentment. When we came home, she would just rail against the Pope was responsible for all the evils in the world, and so when I got to AA, you said spiritual, but I knew you meant religious. I mean, come on, look, it smacks of religion around here, right? And it does. It's not a religion, but it looks like a religion, and it's not a cult, but it looks like a cult. I get that. I mean, if it were, I have a friend that likes to call it a cult, and I always tell him, if it were a cult, you'd be in a shallow grave in the desert, man, because cults don't let people talk shit about them and stay, and religions don't either, right? You can't, like, I can't go back to the Catholic Church and say, like, I'm a Catholic except for the part about not accepting Jesus or thinking all the saints are bullshit and everything you do is crack, but I want to be a part of it. They would be like, no, thank you. Right? We don't. And this is AA or this is CA, right? This isn't even AA. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You have a fucking program that you invited to a guy to speak who's not even part of the program, and you're all like, this is great, man. This is fabulous. That's the beauty of this. Okay? The beauty of this is the ability to see beyond, like, that we're not all wearing blue suits and red ties and saying, like, I found myself here, right? And the next guy says, I found myself here too. And the next guy says, I found myself here too. And you think you're not one of you knows what self is. Right? And so we've got, like, I always make it a woman, but it could be a man who goes to the Tuesday night meeting and, 6 blocks from her house and has for 23 years. And she buys the cookies and has for 12 years. And for 6 years before that, she was the secretary. And she goes to the Tuesday night meeting without fail and never goes to AA again during the week. Right? And she worked the steps, out of the, I don't know, the Maxwell House Haggadah. That's a little reference that's probably vague for most, but anyway. Um, you know what I mean? And I would shoot myself if I had her sobriety. But I don't have her sobriety. She does. And you know what? She'd probably shoot herself if she had my sobriety, or hire someone to shoot her for herself, because she doesn't really seem like the kind of person that would put a gun to their head. But she wouldn't want to be me. any more than I would want to be her. And that's the beauty of this thing. You can work it out of the big book like the people like me do, the right way, or you can do it out of the 12 and 12, which is confusing and abstract, or you can do it out of the big book awakening way, or you can do it out of however way you want, or you cannot do it at all if that works for you. And you know what the rest of us can say? Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your experience, strength, and hope. We're really glad you're here, and we hope you come back soon. And that's the deal. And you know, I don't know. I every time I stop speaking or in between speaking or when I'm about to speak, I think I should really speak more specifically about the steps or about my own experience. But who fucking cares? You know, I mean, I can give you the details. I got married. It was great. We got divorced. That was okay. Painful at first. Uh, I got married again. We had 4 kids. 2 of them turned 20 yesterday. 2 of them are in the IDF, in the Israeli Defense Forces. One's a combat soldier. He's learning underground warfare. He's going to fight in tunnels. Right? Why am I a Jew? Because at 14 years sober, my sponsor, a man named Howard Polans of blessed memory, said to me, I think you need to have a, again, I don't remember exactly what he said. Had I known, I was going to put it in my pitch and say it over and over again for the next 50 years, 44 years so far, 30 years since he said it. I would have paid better attention to what he said. But I think he said something to the effect of more authentic, richer, more sophisticated spiritual experience. I mean, you know, I think he wanted me to have a spiritual experience that extended beyond reading, you know, semi quasi spiritual literature while defecating, even if I did it every day. That's not what I did, but we've all heard that guy talk, right? Every morning I read 6 spiritual books while I go to the bathroom. Really, that sounds like a highly developed spiritual life. You should start a religion, you know? But whatever, that's what works for him. Again, not my cup of tea, but I don't like tea. Right? I'm drinking decaf coffee. Why? Because I'm at a meeting. And when I go to a meeting, I drink coffee. That's just a thing I do. I literally have a hard time talking in a meeting if I'm not drinking coffee. But it's 10:30 at night. None of you guys are coming to my house to talk with me for the next 4 hours. So I got to drink decaf. Right? The most I'll get is like a 20-minute WhatsApp before someone says, I got to go. I'm I can't do this with you, whatever this is we're doing. We're not doing this anymore. I'm out. Right? You know, there's like a thrill to speak to the speaker until it's not thrilling anymore. Until you're like, oh man, this fucking, what is he talking about? Anyway, so there's like, what is the essence of my experience is that this works in both directions and sideways. Yeah. Okay. Going to sleep. We packed his bag. What time are we leaving? 7:20? Yeah. Okay. That's the combat soldier. Yeah, so Howard wants me to have a deeper spiritual experience. I'm 14 years sober, a deeper second step experience. And he says, go searching for people in AA that have had interesting spiritual experiences to you, and people outside of AA. Read books. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. I read any number of things, and starts me down this road that leads me to a reform conversion in Judaism, which doesn't mean anything. Some of you are thinking, oh, only reform. No, it doesn't. It's like the most powerful thing I've ever done. And then I converted in the conservative community, which a couple of years later, which is more intense. And then I come to Israel for 4 months. Came for 4 months in 2000, 24 years ago, on the 12th. Next week, I'm a week short of 24 years here. I'm supposed to be here for 4 months. That's how I do AA. You know what I mean? Like, I'm in. I'm in deep, I'm in hard, I'm in like, and if you're not, that's okay. Um, again, do it any way you want to do it. And if it works for you, do it. Great. Fantastic. This is the way I do it. And so 24 years later, right? I've got this kid who's a combat soldier. He's like been in the war in Oz, and he's going back to the war. He's going, I can outlast that. Okay, I'll wrap it up. Um, and why is he doing that? Because his daddy wanted to have a deeper second step experience. You know, that doesn't seem fair, but that's life. The lives we live have consequence and have meaning and have depth and have weight, and that's the beauty. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. My life trajectory was to spend the rest of my life in my parents' basement watching cable television in my underwear, eating snack food. That's what I was shooting for. That was my best shot. Picking Twinkie crumbs out of my belly button while I changed the channels, looking for something interesting to watch. That was as good as it was going to get for me. I gotta tell you, that's not the life I have today. It's not the life I had yesterday. And when tomorrow becomes today, it won't be the life I have today. The life I have today is so much more than that. And it's because of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not all Alcoholics Anonymous. I feared that I would become a guy who had his name on a cup and sat in the same chair because no one ever sat in my chair with a stack of Oreos in front of me, pontificating on the big. That's not the life I have today either. I have a lot of stuff in my life that has nothing to do with Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's beautiful. And that's great. And that's because I'm an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you.